I'm just going to go ahead and get started. We have about 48 RSVPs, so we're expecting to hear some dings as people realize what time it is. But my name is Stephanie Simpson, and I am the Executive Director of the Bleeding Disorder Foundation of Washington. And the BDFW has been heavily involved in advocacy at the state level for the past 10 years since I've been here, and really developed ourselves as a lead patient advocacy group. And our board has expanded their mission over the years to also include rare and kind of chronic conditions. And we really believe that our voice is stronger if we can make sure that there are many disease states at the table, because we can't go and testify all the time and just say hemophilia, VWD. So we decided that we wanted to work with the Chronic Disease Coalition that Jim's been working on to make sure that we could have a whole army of individuals who can advocate for patients in Washington in all sorts of different topics. We know that we won't always have the same topic to be our number one priority, but we do know that Washington has a very specific way to advocate and speak to our elected officials. And there's no one better than Erin and Carrie to be teaching you, and Jim teaching you that today. I think together we've all known each other about 10 years. We all started working on this together when ACA was being implemented into the state. So it is fun now to come together to educate some additional folks. How the BDFW does our online education is we encourage you to be as active and involved as possible in the conversation. So feel free to send questions to the chat. You can send questions to either Claire or Erica. They can wave, whether they're administrative questions or if you want them to interrupt the speaker. And there's lots of different interactive components to these presentations. If you don't understand or don't quite get how to do any of it, please do not hesitate. We're really used to answering those along the way. And thank you so much for joining us. Okay, Jim.
Great. So, hello, everyone. It's so interesting to be doing this from my living room, but actually, like everybody else, that's what we've just been doing for the last year and a half. So I'm Jim Freeberg. I am, I guess, one of, or maybe the founder of the Patient Coalition of Washington, but this is a new effort to bring together all of the different patient advocacy organizations in Olympia. We got started about a year and a half ago, actually during the pandemic, when actually I was staying at home with my new daughter, and my wife said, "Hey, Jim, why don't you go do something that you want to do while our daughter naps?" And I was thinking about what I wanted to work on, and I made a few phone calls to folks like Carrie and Erin. I said, you know what this we really need to do? We need to get that patient coalition going that we always talked about. And so since then, we have brought together the leading patient groups, and you see the logos here on the screen. There are 10 organizations. Let me make that count. I think 10 organizations that are a part of the training this evening, but we have another 5 organizations that are part of our coalition. I just talked to a new organization yesterday that wants to be a part of it, and so hoping that number does get to 15. We're actually at 14. So our sole focus is state level policy. We're not working on federal issues. We are working in Olympia to make sure that policymakers understand the unique needs of people with chronic diseases. And as Stephanie indicates, it really does take an army down in Olympia to change policy. But when it comes to policy, it doesn't really matter that much if you have multiple sclerosis or diabetes or arthritis. Public policy impacts you the same. And so it makes sense to bring all these organizations together, working on common issues in order to strengthen our laws to make sure that people with chronic disease can live their best life. I personally don't have a chronic disease, but I do say that I live with chronic disease. My mother-in-law has rheumatoid arthritis. She developed rheumatoid soon after she gave birth to my wife. So she's been living with it for about 40 years, and it impacts her, significantly every day. Even today, I took my granddaughter over there. We live next door to my in-laws, so I see them all the time. And my grandmother literally cannot pick up my granddaughter because her hands are so crippled from her rheumatoid. And it just makes me think that, you know, if she didn't have rheumatoid, how different her life would be and how different my wife's life would be. And I know that situation, you know, is repeated thousands of times across the state, how different our lives would be without chronic illness. So doing my part to see what we can do to change policies to make the lives better. I do want to give a shout out to all the organizations that you see represented on the screen here. There's at least 3, maybe 4 or more staff people from these organizations that are on the presentation now. I saw Penny from American Heart Association, Seth at the National MS Society, Allison Fine from the Center for Chronic Illness, and I hope this new member of the National Psoriasis Foundation. I see Lucy is on the training as well. So look forward to chatting with y'all more, and look forward to hearing from Carrie about how to talk to your legislators.
All right, everybody, before we hear from Carrie, we want to hear from you. So this is a poll, and the way to access this poll is you can use your camera on your phone to highlight the QR code, and it'll populate on the top of the screen a button for you to click that'll open up the poll. Or if you prefer to get to it from the web, you can go to slido.com and use the code that's in the bottom left of this screen right here, and that code is 450402. And we want to hear what group you represent or are a part of and where you're joining us from. We have mental health in Kenmore. Thank you for joining us from Kenmore. We have Washington Insulin for All in Olympia. We have some friends in Portland from the National Psoriasis Foundation, Hemophilia and Sickle Cell in Auburn. Chronic illness and rare disease in Seattle, bleeding disorders in the middle of nowhere. Hi, Anastasia. Unless that's someone else, hi to everyone. Patient Coalition in Renton, Insulin for All in Seattle. Cancer Survival in Seattle. Congrats. For those of you who are just joining, we're doing a quick poll because we want to hear from you what group you're a part of and where you're joining us from. To do the poll, you can use your phone camera to highlight the QR code that's on the screen, or you can use your web browser and go to slido.com and enter the code.
And Erica, we're going to be doing more engagement using Slido later.
Yes, and once you're on this one, that will work for the rest of the slides that are as part of this slideshow. So.
Cool.
Alrighty, so we want to go through some tips for using the website in Zoom as well. So we have a notes on the website that you can download. That's on the website that you used to get here today. You can also on here switch from gallery view and speaker view so you can see everyone that you want to, and you can do that by clicking the view button that's at the top right corner of your screen. You might have to highlight your screen and move your cursor around to get that to show up. And then you can do it based on your preference of how you like to see the screen. We also want to let you know that when we are showing slides, you can make the slides smaller so that you can see more of the group, or vice versa, make the slides larger if they're harder for you to read by hovering in between the slides and the participants, and two little gray lines will show up, and you can click and drag that to change the size of the slides and the participants view. We love seeing all of you, so feel free to have your camera on if you would like to during this, and make sure to feel free to ask questions. You can send them in the chat, and to ask when it feels appropriate to ask them, but in the chat you can send at any time, and Claire and I will be here to ask those questions as well. All right, and then let's hear from Carrie, or I'm so sorry, from Erin.
No worries. Thanks, Erica. And thank you all for taking the time to introduce yourself in the chat. It was interesting to hear who's here, where you're from, and also what brings you to this work and being here tonight. My name is Erin Jajek, and as was mentioned before, I am a lobbyist, and I've had the pleasure of working with the Bleeding Disorder Foundation of Washington for, must be about almost 10 years, Stephanie, 9 years in this capacity, and also get to collaborate with Jim and the other patient groups in the newly formed coalition. So what I've done a lot of work in the legislature around issues that impact patients and people that actually need healthcare and that maybe have chronic conditions or a catastrophic illness. And it's a pure joy. When I started it, I had no underlying health conditions. I now have 2 autoimmunes and I've had cancer. So I feel like maybe I knew that I was going to need healthcare and just really wanted to get into this early. But I love working on these issues. It is the reason I got into politics, and it's my favorite thing I'll ever work on was the Affordable Care Act. And a lot of people here were involved in that in different ways. But now, the last couple of years, we just get to focus in our state on trying to make things better after the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act wasn't perfect, right? So we work on things every session, and part of this training, you'll get to hear about the actual topics that are coming up to work on this session. But what I get to talk to you about tonight is just a little bit of level setting about when we're talking about going into session this January. I wanted to give you a primer on what that means, what to expect, and how things are looking for the state legislature this year. I would love it if people ask questions at any point. So you can throw your hand up, you can unmute, you can put a question in the chat. I guarantee if you have that question, someone else does, or I can take questions at the end. But I'll start by saying one important thing for this session is that our state legislature goes, it's called a long session and a short session. And the long sessions are in the odd number years. So we just had a long session this past winter and spring. It was 105 days and it felt longer than that because it was all virtual. But going into next year, it's a short session. So it's 60 days. So that's great because they get their work done quicker. But what it means is those times in the longer years, they take more time. They do the full state budget. They do a full capital, like construction budget. They pass a lot of legislation. They have time to work on it. And coming into a short session, it is shorter. And then it feels shockingly shorter for certain things like bills and things you don't have time to perfect and move through the process. So when you go into a short session, here's kind of to frame what they'll be looking at. Things that are emergent or urgent. So we all know there's a lot of that in this world. I don't even know what the emergent issues are going to be in January today because I didn't know we'd have a new variant that sounds like a transformer last week that now we're waiting to see how it impacts. And so we could have other things, right? There's massive flooding up in Northwest Washington. There's been wildfires this summer, right, in certain areas. So if you think about things like that, that's the types of things they may have to go look at. They'll also tackle policy issues that have come up. And I would say that one of the things we're working on that you'll get into later is the thing that suddenly showed up. So we're bringing a bill forward saying, hey, this is a problem that just showed up. So emergent and urgency issues are important. Bills they didn't pass last year that needed more work, called leftovers. There'll be leftovers. Now, they were so prolific last year, there aren't a lot of leftovers from last year to pass. Those are bills that were being worked on and almost got there, then they didn't have time. The other thing they'll do this year is true up their budgets. And I like to think of this as like your mid-month paycheck. So you know how we all pay most of our bills at the beginning of the month. Well, in the middle of the month, you're truing some things up. And one thing that's really important for this year is that sometimes we go into session and the budget's up. Sometimes the budget's down from when we left last time. Sometimes it's pretty neutral. It's up a lot this year, close to $4 billion, which is just under or just over 10%. I do math right off the top of my head, Carrie? Right, because it's a 60 billion.
Just under 10%.
Under 10%. Okay. It's a lot of money. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Some are the economy recovering, different factors. People have been out there doing more. The state passed some new revenue sources last year. So they have more money. So that's good stuff. Hopefully they spend that on good stuff. I don't think we're working a bunch of those this year, but it does put them in a little bit better mood, which I do think is important for the work we do versus them being in a very stressed out, bad mood if they're going in and having to cut $3 billion from the budget. So I always like to note that because like right now we're going into hopefully a good mood phase with this. Also, like one thing that I know I always watch from a patient perspective are those that do have a chronic illness or have had a serious illness is that I think this year our state will make huge investments in the behavioral health system. So that's outpatient mental health, inpatient mental health, just a normal counselor one of us might see to something more important, running the spectrum. Our state lags in that. And I do think that's an area that can often impact people that are dealing with health issues. And so I'm really hopeful this year with this extra money, we may see some investments in behavioral health, which is a space that's been left behind a bit. Even if they've made more strides in healthcare overall, it's been more on the physical health side. And we all know the pandemic has just made everything worse in the behavioral mental health space. So that's one thing I'm watching for when I see that money. But for your point of view, you just need to know it means they're probably in a better mood than they would be if the budget was down. They also they're sitting on a bunch of money that the federal government gave them last year. It's sometimes called the COVID money. Other people call it the acronym ARPA. But it was money to help out the states due to the economic hits and all the constraints of like the lockdowns and COVID. And so those are the that money needs to go to help offset some things that are more directly related to COVID. But again, they have money to spend, might be in a little bit better mood. The one thing I'll say complicates this year is that they're going to be, as you can imagine, operating in a mostly virtual environment again. So committees, which you guys will talk about how some of us engage and give testimony and show up at committees to talk about bills, that's all going to be done virtual by Zoom. So I actually think this is the one really great thing of the COVID scenario and the pandemic is I don't think the legislature will ever take away remote testimony. So I've heard a couple of you are from Central Washington and even, I got to say, even from Auburn these days. It's really hard to get to Olympia to testify. And I hope we've heard this is something the legislature will keep moving forward as an option for folks to testify from home. I've talked to a lot of the legislators saying it's really helpful for those that may have physical or mental disabilities or are sick. It can be hard to get to Olympia and it's hard to go in a room full of 50 people you don't know in the winter, right? There's undeniably several illnesses in there. So a lot of us have made the case to keep these remote testimonies. And so this year, it'll all be remote for committees. So no one will be in Olympia. They are allowing legislators to go back and when they vote on the actual floor, they'll be able to be there in person with some different rules. The House does require vaccines. The Senate does not. They can take a test, but really trying to get them back in to do some voting. And we've heard that some of them may take in-person meetings. And if you ever hear that, I have heard they will all honor virtual meetings as well. So if you're ever thinking about, or we're talking about talking to a legislator, they're all still doing Zoom meetings to accommodate folks as they're not feeling quite comfortable that we've moved out of the pandemic enough to have all these people in there. And the last piece I'd say when you're thinking about the lay of the land and the context for this session is probably the most important part. all of the members of the House of Representatives and half of the senators are up for re-election next November. And so that's on their mind. It's always on an elected official's mind. But the reason I say it's maybe the most important is you are a voter in their district. You are a constituent, you're a neighbor, you are someone that is from where they live. And so when you all do take the time and reach out to legislators, it's really meaningful and they pay attention. And I got to say, I think they pay attention a lot in an election year, but you get to make that on the ground connection. Like I get to bring your voice forward, and I'm kind of the person that can annoy them and bug them all the time about the things we're working on. But when you guys reach out, it really makes that connection, that memory back to like, oh, you live in this area, it's just down the street from me. And they will all be in the House and half the Senate running for re-election this spring and summer and fall. So that is in the forefront of their minds this year as well. I'm going to take a breath and pause. Are there any questions, or any of you insiders, are there things I missed that you want to chime in with? No.
Erin, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, thank you.
How do you think the pandemic impacts the message that patients have in terms of, is there like a increased receptivity to the concerns of people with a chronic illness because there's a pandemic going on?
That's a really good point, because like you could say a lot of times that it was said those with a chronic condition were more at risk, right? Or we're like having to take more precautions. This legislature has been pretty open to the concerns of patients, so it may tip a little bit more. I'd say I can't fault the dynamic of this legislature towards patients last couple of years. I'm not even sure it could get better. Like they don't water down much of our stuff. We pass the stuff we run. But I think there's been a change in maybe their leniency or patience with insurance carriers that were making a bunch of money when no one went to the doctor. They're all aware of that. And I've heard more frustration with hospitals after the last year, which is surprising because hospitals have also, were hit so hard in the pandemic. But there's been some issues around care for some folks that I think legislators are interested in. So I don't know if it helped us, but maybe some of the folks, like I think the insurance carriers that push back a lot on what we want, they may be a little less lenient to their position this year versus 2 years ago. I'll just share one more piece of why I think it's so important. I always think it's so important for real people to talk about these things and why it's important, but why I think it's so important we show up as those that have chronic illness. How are you identify? The ones that I just say, the people actually need access to care to be well and healthy and try to manage the health issues they're dealing with, is that sometimes when I'm talking about things, people will get lumped into like, so if I'm talking about a prescription drug thing, they'll say like, oh, whatever, everyone just wants brand name Lipitor and not generic Lipitor. And I just say, this is so much bigger than that. Like these are high level specialty meds for a lot of people that like are the thing that keeps them well or alive. And so it's important for us, even though it can, I even get frustrated, you guys, after like, I've been working on this stuff for 15 years. The fact I have to say that so much is surprising, but it just reminds me how much we have to remind. This isn't like we're choosing to take something in a certain way, or we're calling, I would say like top shelf. We're not like calling for a top shelf prescription. Like, oh, I want the high end Lipitor. This is not a generic versus brand name. These are incredible innovations usually that then change our new course of treatment, or the only thing keeping someone stable, or many of you have to try many of them and you don't get to pick most of the time. It's something that works and we don't control the cost. So it's interesting because if they don't have someone in their family or themselves have this, it's a piece that gets missed, and we can often just be thought of as like with the other patients. So that's why I do like it when you guys are comfortable doing this outreach and sharing your story. And I know that Carrie and Stephanie and Jim and everyone are going to teach you how to tell your story well. But I appreciate you telling that story because I know this is personal, but that really makes a difference when you talk about like the treatment you get, why it's so important. And then like we try to talk about how whatever the policy is we're working on, how to help ensure you get to keep seeing your specialist, that you get to keep accessing the med that works for you. And when it stops working, you have other options, if there are, right? So these types of things, the stories you all tell and the specific examples are what clicks. And I'll hear them then connect with the bill and say back and forth, rather than me talking about it in a broad way about people with a chronic condition, right? It's just not as meaningful.
Hi, my name is Liz Lassick, and I have a question. How many legislators do we have who are presently active or retired healthcare specialists, providers?
We can count that up, and it's not that many. Unfortunately, it's got to be under 5. I mean, the healthcare chair in the House just retired nurse a couple of years ago. We have a couple public health people, but they're not nurses. We don't have any doctors.
Representative Ty is a pharmacist.
Pharmacist, and actually currently I think works in the practice with her husband, who is a physician. Oh, there's a dentist called the Air.
Erin, how many do you think have a chronic illness or know somebody with a chronic illness?
I don't know. That's only if they choose to kind of disclose that, right? And we don't run a spreadsheet of it. You can tell the ones that do. They share the story a lot. That was kind of my point earlier, that if we run policies that are sound and have the evidence in Washington State, we have a lot of support that's usually bipartisan because they know someone or they have it themselves. But a long time ago, there was a notion of keeping a list, and it got kind of creepy. Because then I'd like get a report back and follow. Like, I was supposed to follow up, like, oh, was it your son that has, it just, we had one for a while, but we don't anymore. But this is something where they'll share it with you guys when you talk to them. So if you hear it, that's always good intel back to us. I've just never figured out a savvy way to ask.
Is there any more questions? If something comes up, we can always send it to Erin or see if somebody else can't answer it. But thank you so much, Erin. I know that you always have such great insight, so we appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for doing this, you guys.
Yes.
Have a good night.
Yes. Okay. And the next is Carrie, and she works with Erin. Or she is Erin's right-hand person on everything, those that work with Erin. And she has been an educator for a very long time in this arena. And I know the BDFW community always enjoys hearing her trainings. And so I think that you will as well. So thank you, Carrie.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And it's so great to see you all here tonight. Like Stephanie said, my name is Carrie Glover, and I do work with Erin, team Erin Carrie, and we have worked together since many moons ago, 15 years ago, when we both started at the American Cancer Society. So I'll say my career in policy work and lobbying in healthcare started at the American Cancer Society, so one of our very own coalition members. And in that position, I was a grassroots organizer. And so in that role, I did what I'm about to do now, is I taught volunteers how to engage with their elected officials in Olympia and how to engage in the process. And it's something that I just really, truly, and honestly believe in. Now working with a lot of the lobbyists and stuff, like, they do the good work, the important work, and at the same time, they can only carry the story and the statistics so far. What is much more impactful is when we are able to bring volunteers, patients, and put a real face to the issues that we're trying to work on. Because some of these are really complex, really wonky. Like, there's one, again, that, like, both of actually the issues that we'll provide training on this week and next, they're a little bit wonky and not that exciting to talk about. Like, I mean, the amount of time I'm spending on how to finesse the one pager so that people will care about what I'm saying and not use like insurance jargon. What'll be even more impactful than that one pager is when people come down and share that story, when people get up and testify, when people take the effort to meet with their legislators. And again, I think we got to take the wins of these past couple years as we can get them. And the virtual environment, as Erin talked about, really opened up this door that I think will never fully close again, of how we're able to engage with our legislature in a virtual way. And that means a lot for getting geographic diverse representation across our state, diversity in stories, and just, you don't have to get there at 8 o'clock in the morning and find parking on campus, which means you really need to get there at like 7:15, but then you're running up against running through your parking time limit and how you're going to rush through your meetings because they're going to give you a ticket. This makes engaging in the process so much easier and so much a more pleasant experience, but still brings that authenticity of your story. So tonight, our focus of the training is how to have an effective meeting with legislators. There's a couple of different ways to engage in the process. Tonight is how to have a one-on-one meeting and how to structure your ask, how to structure your story. And then next week, we'll shift and talk about how we engage in a different type of advocacy, which is the actual testifying on a bill. Both of these are great ways to engage, share your story, and try and advance an issue that you really care about. So how to have an effective meeting. Next slide. So I love a framework. I love something that helps organize my thoughts. I am very type A. And so I have like the number of lists I have, and I check stuff off. And sometimes if I've forgotten to put something on my list, I go back and I put it on my list just so I can check it off. So I think this type of structure really helps think through and organize your thoughts so that you can go into a meeting and really effectively get across your message. When you meet with a legislator, both in virtual land and in person, these are short meetings. So 15 minutes that like during the legislative session. During the interim, when we're not in session, if you're doing a district meeting, which someday we can meet with people, in district in person again, those can sometimes be a little bit longer, but a lot of the work that we do is done in session, and those are 15-minute meetings. And you also got to think, so there's 15 minutes to introduce, to talk about your issue, and to make an ask. And then these days, you also have to allow for delays, like you're not waiting outside of their door for them to wrap up their meeting. You're waiting them to move from one Zoom to another, and sometimes those Zoom run long. And so there's this like transition piece that always they can create delays, getting through all of your material and making sure you get your ask across. It's a lot, and 15 minutes goes by real fast. You also want to allow time for them to talk. And so you don't want to plan to fill the entire 15 minutes with what you have to say or what your group has to say. So this framework that we're going to talk about, hook, line, and sinker, is a way to really organize your thoughts, get them concise, and then you'll be able to run through this. And I always say like hook, line, and sinker should be done in 5 minutes. And that leaves the other 10 minutes of your meeting for glitches, technology, delays, and for letting the legislator have time to talk about what they care about, what they work on, and also react to what you're saying. So we've just taken a 15-minute meeting down to 5 minutes. And that's why we really want to provide some structure. I'm going to go through the different steps of hook, line, and sinker and how you can think about organizing. And I always encourage people fresh after this training, go home and write it, start practicing, put together your story, think about how you're going to do that. Because the biggest tip I can give you on this framework and on anything is to prepare and practice, practice, practice. And I'm going to say that a lot as we get into tips and tricks and stuff, but practice. I have done my hook, line, and sinker. I'm not going to make up something that's not me. I'm going to say mine because I like to practice it. I still practice what I'm going to say before I go into a meeting. I still practice what I'm going to say before I get up to testify. And I have refined and honed my hook, line, and sinker over the past 15 years. And so keep working on it. And it evolves and it changes depending on your life experience, depending on the issues you're working on. So prepare and practice are the biggest things you can do. And this, again, just gives you a little bit of structure of how you can frame that. So next slide. The first step in the hook, line, and sinker is a hook. And of course, this is an analogy looking at fishing, as we all are stuck in this rainy weather and not able to go fishing for another many, many months. But if you think about, you're trying to reel your legislator in. So the first thing you got to do is get the hook in the mouth. You got to get them to pay attention to you. And when that hook goes in that mouth, that fish pays attention to you. You've just grabbed them. So how do you get a legislator to pay attention to you? You want them to understand who you are and why they should care about what you have to say. And so you want to share your name, who you're there on behalf of, but the why they should care is really critical, because as Erin said, the thing that legislators really care about is getting elected again. And we want to make sure that they understand that you are a constituent who has power over that result. And so that they should care about the issues, and they do care about the issues because that's why they got into office. But why they should care specifically about what you have to say is your issue is important, and there's something that they have the power to make a decision about, and you are a constituent in their district, and you have the power to vote for them or for someone else. So how to get them to pay attention. I think the hook has become perhaps even more important in virtual land and figuring out what you can say to really generate that interest in you, because it's something that Erin and I talk a lot about. Is there used to be a lot more sensory association for legislators to remember. Like, oh, I talked to this patient in the hallway and it was raining and it was wet. So like there's like these sensory things that help trigger memory. There's a smell that was happening. There was, the fire alarm went off. There's a lot of stuff that happens in person that is gone now in the virtual environment, except for like, when my dog comes up and barks behind me. But having that sensory association, we have to really make sure that you're saying something that helps them remember who told them about this issue and why they cared. So you don't just want to say, hi, my name is Carrie Glover. I'm here to talk to you today. You want to build out your story a little bit more. Also not making it too long, because remember, we got 5 minutes here. So, hi, my name is Carrie Glover. I'm here today. I'm a volunteer with the Bleeding Disorder Foundation of Washington. I'm a constituent in your district. And I live in the Del Ridge neighborhood in West Seattle. And so you can kind of think like I'm up above the ridge a little bit. And right now, I'm the way in and out of West Seattle because our bridge is broken. And so people coming and driving by where I am every day trying to get in and out of our neighborhoods. So you see, it's a little bit more complex, but it creates a story that will trigger that memory a little bit more than just, I'm Carrie and I live in Seattle. So that's the hook. Build it out. Build something that makes them associate you with the district, where you are in the district, to create a little bit more of a tangible memory that'll link back to when they're working on this bill and they're having discussions with their fellow legislators. They're like, oh, this person said something to me, and it jogs that whole story that we're about to go through everything else. Any questions on hook before we move on to our next steps? And I think we have a trivia slide next. We can go do another Slido. So people can go to the Slido now. Yeah, kick it off. Go, Erica.
Alrighty, so just a reminder of how to use Slido is you can use your camera to highlight the QR code that's on the screen, and that'll open up the web page to make your vote on which hook is more effective. You can also go to the website slido.com and put in that code 450402. Again, this is going to be the same one each time. So if that stays open on your phone, you can, it'll repopulate as whichever slide is live.
All right, this one's we're doing a simple one this time because I just told you how to really build it out. And so I think most everyone are getting it. Really looking at building out that story. I'm Carrie, who I'm here with, and then that district association to help show them why they should care about what you have to say. So I think we'll give people a couple more minutes to answer, but we're getting a very good response. Good job, everyone. Everyone's listening. This Slido thing is so fun.
Hey, Carrie. Can I
Yeah.
add something? I think one thing that caught me, I think this is really helpful and a really nice way to tighten your introduction. One thing that caught me, I think that it also speaks to the importance of building a relationship with your legislator, so that when you come to them, it may not be the first time you ever meet with them. I was
Yeah.
thinking about that like, this is a great way to start that introduction in that story. But
It helps jog their memory and build that every time you see them then in the grocery store. And these are people who live in your neighborhoods, in your community. So yeah. All right, I think we can go on to the next slide. Okay, the line. It's a tie for me between all of these of which one is most important. And each one I'm going to say it's the most important because they're all really important. But the line is why you are there. It's why this is important. And so this is where I would spend most of your time, is sharing your story and maybe some statistics. Maybe some of you are scientists and researchers, I shouldn't presume, and if you are, like, don't be shy, share your brilliance. But for the most part, when we're having you all, when you're engaging with legislators, you're doing that as a patient to share your story and put a face to the issue. And so you want to build this out, and spend most of your time building this. When I tell you to go home and practice and work on this piece the most. Saying where you are, creating a little hook in your neighborhood is, you could spend a little bit of time on this, but this is what you will work on refining and building out, and what will evolve the most over time. So I'll say that we're working on something that's around access to healthcare. And so I'm framing my story around this and my line around this. And I'm Carrie Glover, and I've already given you my hook. My line is that I am a cancer survivor. I had cancer first when I was 27 years old. I had just started working for the American Cancer Society, and I looked at a little brochure of melanoma, and I looked at that picture of that mole, and I looked at my forehead, and I went, oh my gosh, that's concerning. And I went to the doctor, and I had melanoma. Unfortunately, it came back again last year. So that's been a hard thing to juggle on how to navigate in this virtual world and in this difficult times, is going through another cancer diagnosis. I've been very fortunate that both of my cancer diagnoses were caught very early and very treatable just with removing the tumor. Others aren't quite as fortunate as me, but I've been very lucky, and I believe in advocating on behalf of these issues as a result. I'm also a small business owner. I own my own business, and as a result, I don't have employer-sponsored health insurance. I rely on the system that we've worked to create. I rely on purchasing my health insurance through the Health Benefit Exchange. If it hadn't been for the Affordable Care Act and all of the work that we've done, I would not have been able to start my own business, because I would not have been able to buy healthcare, and I would have been stuck independent on working for an employer who offers that type of coverage. So I am able to be here today because of the work that we've done, and we have more work to do, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So that's my line. And again, it's grown, it's evolved, it changed when I started my own business. Like, this is all true. I'm telling you all my story as we go through. And so that's how you make the issue that you're talking about personal to you. That's how putting a face to it for the legislator. Why they should care about this issue is that it's impacting people in their district, and you are one of those people, and you're putting a face to that. Any questions on the line?
Carrie, I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah.
Is that I think, you mentioned this beforehand, and I cannot reiterate how many times I've had to practice my line to make it as few words as possible, because your line can be so painful to share, and everything can seem so important to include in it, but we have to really narrow down what pulls on the heartstrings, and how do we get through it not feeling hurt that we can't share everything. And I also say, like, if you are advocating for a cause, like if I advocate for bleeding disorders, I can do it very succinctly with a lot of poignant points. If I advocate for mental health for my child, it is very different. So just having a lot of compassion for yourself as you write your line, and knowing that it can be kind of an uncomfortable process.
Thanks for that, Stephanie. And I'll also say, Your line is also where you can be your most authentic self. And that's what I think, that's why, to echo what Stephanie said, is I don't want to say perfecting it, honing it and making sure that you're concise in what you have to share, and not telling your whole story, because you all have very complex and elaborate stories, but making sure you're getting to the most important pieces of your story, because it's hard to talk about these things. And I've practiced again a million times, and I've testified and I've talked about my story. I've testified as Carrie, not just on behalf of my clients. I've talked to Stephanie about this a lot the past few years. It's been one of the hardest things I've done, is for Carrie to be Carrie and not just part of the lobbying team. I know these things are really hard to talk about, and sometimes you might cry, you might get upset, and you want to allow space for that as well, because not that you want to falsely do that and cry to draw attention. I don't do that either. But if you are telling your story and you authentically are getting, like, these are hard things. And so giving yourself some space and time to be honest in that with the legislator. Yeah, that's why it's good to hone these. It's good to practice these things, so that then you know what you're going to say and you're able to be authentic with those legislators as you're talking to them. Very good. All right. Any other questions before we go on to part 3? All right. Now, see, now I'm going to say this is the most important thing, but not really. I do think the line is the most important thing, because it's you sharing your story, but this is also the whole point of it, is your sinker. It's your ask. You're reeling that fish in. You've hooked them. You've got them on the line. And you're reeling them in because you're there to ask them to do something. So you want to make sure that you have practiced this as well, because sometimes these issues are very complex. You don't want to go down a rabbit hole. You do not have to know how to read bills. Please don't spend your time doing that. That's what we're here for. But to understand the issue and understand what you're asking for. If you have a bill number, you're going to ask for that. If you have a budget ask, you're going to ask for that. But this is where you want to make a very clear request of action from them. We're going to get into some of the tips and tricks in a minute that are things not to do during this time or during your meeting to take away from that. Just thinking the whole time your goal is asking them to do something. So I've done my hook, I've done my line. I am here today, Senator, because I would like you to support this legislation that will expand access to quality, affordable health care by creating a state health benefit exchange. It already exists, but like as an example, like you want to get that ask and ask them, can I count on your support for this? That is the whole goal. That is one you want to get to. This is also where you don't be shy about asking them. Again, don't be like, I care about this issue, I care about this bill, and not ask them. Ask the question, can I count on your support for this issue? Or if it's something you don't like, can I count on, we're really concerned with this. Can I count on your help on how we can address this better? So don't forget to ask the question. Don't put all that work into your short story and sharing who you are and putting that face to it and not get that ask in. So make it clear, make it concise. Don't get it bogged down in a bunch of details and rabbit holing. Clear, concise, quick ask. Any questions on that? All right. This will all wrap together. I think we have another Slido poll. Is that right? We do. Yeah. Back to Slido.
A quiz, and it's going to ask you for your name. You don't have to put your actual name. You can just put like NA, just because then this isn't school. We don't have to know who answered which question, which way. But I am going to wait until we have a solid number of us in the quiz. Just remember to access this. If you already had the thing open, it'll be the same web page, or you can again use that QR code to get to this question. I'm going to see if we can get to 14 people on.
Hi, I would love to, but I'm not getting there.
Alrighty, do you have, can you open up, like if you have an iPhone Safari or whatever
I've scanned it, but for some reason it's not, it scans, but then it wants me to give a phone number so that I can send or receive money.
Oh, that's not accurate. Don't do that.
Yeah.
If you just open up Safari in general and you can go to slido.com, SLIDO.com.
IDO.com active. Okay, come back.
We could also probably do some of these in the chat if this is if it's not pulling up. You could totally respond in the chat too if that's simpler. Let's just do the chat. I think that's great. It's a great plan B. This is going to come into one of my tips and tricks is always have a plan B. So for those of you who are having a hard time accessing the Slido webpage, I think all of these, you can just plug your answer into the chat. And yeah.
Alrighty, so let's go to the question. In your thinker, should you ask the legislator to come to your organization's event to support a specific bill or both?
Once again, I'm sorry, I'm not finding the chat either.
For the chat, if you highlight by moving your mouse around your screen, underneath where the where you can see the slides right now, it should populate a thing and like a gray box, and in that there should be a chat button that's next to like where you would turn off your video or turn on or mute yourself. It's next to that.
Well, we'll just know you're mentally logging your votes, and you can then take credit for being right no matter what, and no one can question it. You're fine.
Let's see what the answer is. So we had 85% of us guess support a specific bill, 15% both, 0 to an event. And the correct answer is to support a specific bill.
And that is the correct answer. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is the correct answer there. But again, just getting to, and it's not that your event's not important. We'll come back to that. But that the whole goal of your meeting is that you're there to ask them to support your bill or to support a budget ask. All right, next slide. All right, and I will eternally now credit Erica and Claire for coming up with the final thing. As my final tip was always just to say thank you to your legislators, but then they came up with the clever thing of saying, you've got the catch. So you've hooked them, you've pulled them in on the line, you've sinker, and then now you want the catch. You want to end on a good note. You want to thank them. Whether they say that they're going to vote for your bill or not, I mean, we hope that they say yes. But that's not always what happens. They're legislators, they have opinions, they have work, and you're trying to work towards moving them towards being on the same page of what you want them to do. But regardless of that, you always just want to thank them. Thank them for taking the time to talk with you. Thank you for hearing my story today. Thank you for considering supporting the bill, House Bill 1234. So thank those legislators and do that catch. Hopefully we get them. All right. Adapting to a virtual environment. So as my dog is rolling outside and my sister's cat is meowing at me right now, we know that things are a little bit different these days. It's opened up a lot of opportunity, but you always want to think through what that means. We just want to be prepared and how we can pivot and adapt in this virtual environment. So the first thing I always say is have a plan B. Sometimes your Wi-Fi goes out. Do you know how to set your phone up on a hotspot so you can get plugged in there? If not, talk to your staff people and have them help talk you through that. Figure out how to have an alternative. If the power goes out and you can't get into a meeting, have a plan B that you're ready to write up and submit in your request, your hook, line, sinker. How can you adapt that into a written form and turn that in and get that communication into your legislator, even though maybe technology failed that day? So always, always, always prepare and have a plan B. Another thing, so when we look at the hook, so going back through each of these steps of our framework, of our hook, line, sinker, there's ways that we can adapt in a virtual environment to make the meeting more efficient. So in your hook, if it's just you can really work on getting that hook, line, sinker into that 5 minutes. But sometimes, like if you're part of a bigger group, maybe you live in the 46 legislative districts, so many people in the 46 legislative district who love to go and have meetings with their legislators. Sometimes those groups can be 10, 20 people. And even in virtual environment, again, this is a great thing that we've opened up so much more opportunity to people. But when you think about if you have 5, 7, 10, 20 people, if you go through introductions of all of those people, you will consume your entire meeting and probably not even get through that list, because if everyone did their hook and their line and sharing their introduction and their story, that's not realistic. So when you have a bigger group of more than just 1 or 2 people, consider sending in a list in advance of who the participants will be. You can work with your staff partner and get that message into their legislative staff, so that they can see who they are and have that ahead of them, so you don't spend your whole meeting doing introductions. Chat, when you can find it, is another really great tool for that, is saying, how we can do our chat, introduce ourselves through chat. So think of how you can communicate those broader introductions for bigger groups ahead of time and not consume your whole meeting with that. For the line, it's kind of the same thing. If it's just you, then you don't have to worry about this as much. But if with this increased access and more people, you might not have time to get through everyone's stories. So how can you prioritize stories, prioritize talking points, select a couple of people to be the spokespeople for your group? You're not going to be able in a group of 5 people to get through everyone's story in that amount of time. So how can you prioritize talking points? How can you prioritize stories? Pick a spokesperson. And then your sinker, your ask, the biggest virtual tip there is the risk of distraction. Again, with all of the things going on around, is getting distracted by other things and forgetting to make that ask. So make sure that you have that clear, concise ask. We get to actually cheat because, in a meeting, you can't sit there you could sit there with your paper in front of you, but in virtual, nobody knows. My notes are sitting right in front of me, and you could have like a sticky note that's like, don't forget the ask. So think about tools you have available to you in this virtual environment that can really help you be ready and adapt quickly. And so all of this comes back to, we've talked about preparing and practicing, and then being prepared with a plan B. So those are kind of some of the things in this virtual environment that we continue to learn and grow with. Any questions? All right, next slide. And I'm realizing some of these quizzes, so a lot of the quizzes are the do's and don'ts, which I actually haven't gone over yet. So I'm going to go out of order. Sorry, Erica, I didn't notice this when I reviewed slides. Can we go forward a couple and then do the slides? Because it's not fair to make them, nobody look. Okay, so talking through some of the tips and tricks, and there's a document in your virtual tote bag. We have a guidebook that has a lot of this, all of these things I'm talking about put in documents. So we have a document that summarizes hook, line, and sinker. It includes those virtual tips. And then we're going to talk through some of the tips and tricks of legislator meetings. And there are a lot more that I've included to try and let people think through all of the do's and don'ts of what you should and shouldn't do in a meeting. But I'm going to highlight a couple of the ones that stand out to me the most as really, really critical and important to think through as you head into a legislator meeting. Be on time. They may not be, and that's okay. They're a legislator. They're, juggling things. And I know you are too, but you have the opportunity to make sure that you have planned for this and that you are on time. So make sure you are on time, if not a couple minutes early. Legislators all deal with the virtual thing a little bit different. Some of them put you in like a breakout room before, and then they pull you over to this other room, and things that Erica and Claire understand that I don't, how to do with Zoom. So their legislative assistants do all these things, and they can juggle you. But if you're there on time or a little bit early, really helps with how you can navigate through that and takes away some of that pressure. Do your homework, know your issue ahead of time, prepare your ask, practice. Stay on message. All of these things you will hear me say over and over again. There's a consistent theme for a reason. Be open-minded and listen to what they have to say. And this is really important because I think we go in and we really want them to say yes. We want them to agree with what we are asking them to do. But it's also, you all are also our eyes and ears in these legislators' offices. You can get in sometimes with offices we can't. You can cover more ground than we can. We're only a couple of people. And so you all are able to get in and listen to what they have to say. Listen to what, if they're saying no, they can't get there on an issue, why? What's their concern? Sometimes it's misinformation. Sometimes it's stuff that we just can't address, but it's important for us to know. So be open-minded, listen to what they have to say. The virtual session, I think I just talked through all of these virtual session tips. Test your technology, have a plan B, also a C and a D, a designated point person, and setting the list of participants ahead of time. For the don'ts, next slide. Don't go off message. This is where I'm going to come back to some of that trick quiz question earlier on. Don't go off message or discuss unrelated issues. I know that's different. If you open up and ask legislators what their priorities are this year, they're going to talk about that. But what you're talking about, make sure you get to your point first and you don't bring up other things. So you might really care about outdoor recreation, and that is great and wonderful. But if you're there for the Bleeding Disorder Foundation or the Cancer Society or NF Society, make sure you stay on topic, because the more you distract and talk about other things, the more that'll take away from getting your message across. Don't be argumentative or confrontational. They aren't always going to agree with you. And one of my biggest things is that there is a spectrum of support. You might not get somebody to yes, but you might get them to not being no. And so don't be antagonistic in the conversations. If they say they have concerns, if they're opposed, listen to what they have to say, see if you can work with them, see if you can at least bring light to this issue from a different perspective. One of my favorite examples of this was when we were working on the Affordable Care Act. One of our local congressmen was opposed and did ultimately vote no, but at the same time was very pragmatic on a lot of healthcare issues. And so we worked with him a lot behind the scenes, and we were able to have him work on some of the components of the bill in a really positive way that was helpful. Even though he voted no at the end of the day on the bill, he was helpful throughout the process on how we could make sure that the language addressed patient concerns. So understand where people are coming from, listening to them and working with them. And if they end up no at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that they were no through the whole process, and that they can't still be helpful and engage on the issue. So always do that. Don't bog down too much in technical and statistics. We talked about this a little bit already. You're there to put that patient face to the story. Don't make up information. If they ask you something that you don't know, say, I don't know, and promise to get back to them, and then follow up with them. Make sure you do that. Or if it's something you don't know, ask your staff partner to help you out. This is the part of the trick question there that I said earlier of the quiz question of whether you should ask about the bill or a bill in an event. Don't waste an ask. You're there to ask them about a piece of legislation. It's not that your event isn't very, very important, and it's not that that's not a great follow-up opportunity to continue to build that relationship with your legislator. But in that moment, in that 15-minute meeting, you want to ask them to vote for House Bill 1234. If you ask them that, and you ask them to go to your Komen Race for the Cure bleeding disorder walk, they get to say yes to that and not to voting for your bill. So that's why that's a bit of a trick. It's not that the event isn't important. It's not that that's not a great follow-up opportunity. It's that you, in that 15-minute meeting, you don't want to waste your ask. So you ask them to vote for your bill, ask them to vote for or to support your budget request. And then when they've done that, you follow up with them and you say, thank you so much for voting for House Bill 1234. We really appreciate the work that you've done. And I would like to invite you to come to my walk. We'd love to highlight you and have you speak. That's the perfect follow-up opportunity with them. It allows you to keep your meeting focused on your ask and then follow up and continue to build that relationship. In that meeting, in that moment, you're there to ask them. So don't waste an ask. And then the last one is don't get frustrated if you end up meeting with a staff instead of a legislator. And this is a really big one, and it's really hard for people to wrap their heads around because people really want to meet with their legislators. And it's really great when you do get to do that. But sometimes they're busy and they get pulled into other meetings and things go sideways. And sometimes you're going to meet with staff instead. Let me tell you, those little 20-something-year-olds run our world. And so they know everything that their legislator knows. They relay all of their meeting information onto the legislators. And it's really important to view them as a vehicle for getting your message to the legislators. So don't be frustrated or disappointed if you end up meeting with staff instead of the member themselves. And the last thing is that advocacy is a marathon, not a sprint. And so you got to be patient. You got to understand time. You got to understand this is an evolution of years over years over years. And you may pass a bill, and the next year you're going to have to come back and tweak that bill. Erin talked about that a little bit with the Affordable Care Act that we passed back in 2010. And for years and years, we have continued to improve it at the state level. They're working on improving at the federal level. We've made some progress there. It was a great piece, and we have so much more work to do. So we're patient and we pace ourselves, and it is a marathon, not a sprint. In the essence of time, I think that maybe we just skip those quiz questions because I just told you all the answers anyways. And I want to make sure that we allow time for our additional breakouts. So if we want to go to the next slide, I think this is where we'll also, instead of me going live time, this is why it's great to have a plan B and have these screenshots. One of the most, one of your pieces of homework to do so you can find out who you would be meeting with if you created meetings with your legislators is to find out who they are. And I always hope people know that, but it's okay that you don't. And so if you don't know yet who your legislators are, you can go to the Washington State Legislature's website, which this is the direct link that they've provided up here. There's also, you can just go to the www.leg.wa.gov, and that's the legislature's website. And then on the left-hand side, there's a link that says Find Your District. And so you do that, you pull it up, and you plug in your address, and you hit Find My District. That'll pull up and provide you with both your state, they'll pull up a list, and actually I think it's 2 different buttons you can click. One for your state legislative district. If you want, you can also find out who your congressmen are and your federal senators. So, but for your state legislative district, it'll tell you what your district is, and it'll tell you who your senator is and who your 2 representatives are. So we have a little screenshot here that shows how that'll pull up. You can see the Congress members on the lower part and your state legislators on the upper part. Everyone in Washington has 1 state senator, 2 state representatives. We all share the same 2 federal senators, and each person will have 1 representative. And next. And as you pull up and have those listed out before you, you can click on their legislator's name. It pulls up their bios there, and you can click and have ways that you can email them. That's how you can request meetings. If you want to just send them a message and frame your written request in the same way with a hook, line, and sinker, it's not just verbal, it's how you can also write stuff up. And that is how you can find who your legislators are and do some outreach to them. And also, I would always plug work with your staff partners. And that's how we can get in and have effective meetings with legislators. I think that's my last slide. Yes. All right.
Yes. Sorry, I had to skip ahead to see. So we are about to create the breakout room options. Claire's going to be creating those. The different breakout rooms are issue area training on balanced billing. That's going to be done with Jim. And then we're going to have a general breakout room for debrief and asking questions. And that's going to be with Carrie. In order to join a breakout room, if you hover over the bottom of your screen, you can click on the breakout option that's next to chat. So that's going to be the same place where your mute button or your video button is.